I am a second generation Filipino, so my parents are immigrants and they came to this country in the 1980s. So I do appreciate that shout out. So yes, my name is JL. I do also I'm also called Juliel in the academic and professional settings. But if you're my friend or if you're a family member, people call me JL, so you can call me JL. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak with you all today. I never was a student here at Trinity, but I have been on campus here many, many times because in the past, my husband or my fiance at the time was a graduate student here. And I have gone to chapel, actually, several times. And I have enjoyed my time in chapel so much that we decided to get married at the chapel. And that was October 2, 2010, so that's been 11 years ago, and we just celebrated our 11th year anniversary. So I am very aware of the campus. I've been in your library. I've actually studied there while waiting for him to get out of class, and so it's nice to be here again. Anyway, I am here to share with you all my perspective or a perspective from a healthcare worker. So this is my reflection, and I could probably speak for many healthcare workers amid this global pandemic. The CDC records that in December 2019, a cluster of patients in Wuhan, China began to experience shortness of breath. Then in March of 2020, the president then declares a nationwide emergency. And the US then began to shut down their schools, and they also shut down businesses due to the spread of the COVID-19 virus. So the slide that I have a prepared slide. If we can go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to share some pictures. I thought that really showing you some pictures of myself and some things that have happened this past year and a half. So here I am on the left. You can see me. EJ had taken a picture of me right before going to work, and this was at 0500. So we use military time for in the medical field. And so at 0500, I was getting ready to leave for work. And I have been a nurse for 13 years. And never did I feel the need to really care for the sick until this time. As the whole world froze, frontline workers, healthcare workers, kept on going. And during this time, healthcare workers, so nurses, doctors, respiratory therapists, phlebotomists, we were thought of heroes. And so you could see there on the lawn, in that on the bottom picture, says heroes work here. And you could see that all over pretty much the nation in front of healthcare institutions. And so we really felt the support of the community at the time. The community provided food for all shifts, and that was awesome. You know, we really needed that type of support because if you don't have a healthcare worker friend, like food is like one of the things that we need to kind of get us going because it's so hard for us to be able to eat. So if it's just right there and quick to grab, then we just so much appreciate it. So it was a very stressful time for all of us, but our resiliency was very high. We were ready for this. We had this mentality of we were called for this, we were trained for such a time as this. And that was the motto. And so the next slide I'll share with you, we have these oaths, these pledges in nursing school, when doctors go through school, they have their Hippocratic oath. But nurses, we have our Florence Nightingale pledge. And so here, I'll just read it. It says, I solemnly pledge myself before God and in the presence of this assembly to pass my life in purity and to practice my profession faithfully. I will abstain from whatever is deleterious and mischievous and will not take or knowingly administer any harmful drug. I will do all in my power to maintain and elevate the standard of my profession. And so that's what we pledge as healthcare providers, specifically for nurses. So the next picture that I have is a picture of my crew. So as it was mentioned earlier, I do work at Northwestern Lake Forest Hospital, and I am a charge nurse on the pediatric medical surgical floor. And so let me just quickly explain the infrastructure of the unit. So you have your bedside nurse who primarily takes care of the patient. Then you also have a tech who assists the nurse with vital signs and assisting the patients with their daily care, so bathing, eating, brushing their teeth. And then you have the charge nurse. So I, being the charge nurse, or one of the charge nurses, I am responsible of overseeing the ongoings of the unit. So I need to be aware of each patient's health status. I am responsible of assigning nurses to their patients based on their experience and skill. I'm essentially the mama of the unit, like the big sister of the unit, who makes sure that the staff are safe, ultimately assuring that the patients and families are well cared for, and really the staffing ratios that they're appropriate. And so as we began to see the influx of COVID patients in the hospital, in just a matter of days, my unit transitioned from a regular medical surgical pediatric unit to then a step-down unit. And so what a step-down unit is, when you have patients in the ICU and they get better and they no longer need that 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, 1-to-2 care ratio, they come to my unit. And so in a matter of days, you have a whole group of nurses needing to learn how to take care of a step-down type patient. And so that was definitely something that caused some stress. And the reason why I'm sharing with you that type of need to transition, it's because that has happened all across the nation. That units had to transition to adequately learn how to take care of COVID patients. I believe many of us were initially coping well. So let me just actually share with you a few examples or scenarios of what we were needing to cope with. So there was this uncertainty of our safety. So 1 week, the CDC would say that we need to wear N95 masks. Or another week, we need to be in full hazmat suits. Another week, surgical masks were okay. And then another day, we needed to use hospital-supplied scrubs. So we would come into work with our street clothes, and we would change into hospital-supplied scrubs. Then another thing that was added to that was the mandate for us to wear goggles and face shields, which at first we're like, we didn't have to wear goggles, now we have to wear goggles, okay. So it was just so confusing. It was very confusing, and at the time, nobody knew exactly how to appropriately, keep ourselves safe, and so there was just a lot of fear. So that's one thing that we had to cope with. Another thing we had to cope with was as patients require for us to call a code. So I'm sure you guys maybe have seen some hospital scenarios where it's like code blue, or and so you'll see that scene where people rush into the room and automatically start doing compressions. Well, during this time, because the testing for COVID and it was either sensitive or non-sensitive, so patients may come in and they're negative for COVID, but they actually were showing symptoms of COVID. So really the standard was, if a patient were to code, we needed to stop, put on our gear, and that takes minutes. And during that time, those minutes are critical for starting CPR. So as healthcare workers, we had to think about, you're telling me I have to stop and put my gear on before I actually have to help the patient. And it's in our minds that we just go straight into the room and we help. But then you're telling us that we need to stop and put our gear on, which of course it makes sense, right? Because if we were to go in and perform compressions without using the appropriate PPE, the thought was, then we would get sick. and that would just trickle down and the hospital systems would just collapse because then you have no more healthcare workers. So that was one thing that we had to deal with. Another major issue that we had to kind of cope with was the no visitor policy. At first we're thinking, okay, well, this is cool. There's no visitors, so we don't have to deal with family members. We don't have to deal with other people that may interfere with care. However, when you have a COVID patient who was declining quickly, or if you had someone who was just there for another illness and very, very sick, you were that family member for that patient. Nobody else was in that room except that healthcare worker. So whatever emotional, spiritual need that they had at the time, you were it. The closest that you could get to communicating with your family was through FaceTime or through Zoom or any other online video streaming platform. But of course, when you're sick, you need that physical touch, that presence, and so we were that. The next two scenarios really, let me say one more thing. It's the site of the ICU. So I was not on the ICU unit, but we do have to sometimes go down there. And just going down to the ICU unit was traumatic. And so I'm speaking from my perspective as a step-down nurse, but the ICU nurse's experience is far more, it's deeper. The wounds are deeper for those types of nurses and also emergency room nurses. So once, the hallways of the ICU used to be cleared. We have to maintain fire hazard precautions and things. So the hallways should never be cluttered because if in case of a fire, you need to be able to evacuate quickly. However, during COVID, if you go down to the ICU unit, even today, you'll see tables of personal protective equipment, PPE, masks, gowns, face shields. You'll see the IV poles out in the hallway. So you'll see IV pole, IV pole, IV pole with all the meds, 5 to 10 medications outside of the room and the extension cords coming from the room and extending out through the door. And the reason why is because if we needed to change the rate or change, the dosage, then it would be readily accessible. You don't have to gown up and go in. But if you just kind of imagine that, you go into a hall and you see all of that, it just looks like a war zone. So that is stuck in, the nurses' minds. And so the next two scenarios that really affected me the most was a time in which, so I was, of course, charge nurse. One of my more senior nurses calls me into a room and he says that he needs help. So while staying calm, I join him in the patient's room, and the patient who has this extensive cardiac history is complaining of slight chest pain. So as a nurse and I quickly determined what were our next steps. We do an EKG, so we put on those lovely leads, 12 stickies on their chest to just kind of gather information about this patient's heart status. And sorry, I'm getting a little technical, but hopefully you'll gather what I'm getting at here. So we relay all the information to the physician, and of course we diverted the need to call for a code. At that same time, I receive a call from one of my new grad nurses. So, I'm mindful of the ongoings of the whole unit. So one nurse may not necessarily know what the other nurse is doing, so that's the situation here. So my one senior nurse doesn't know that I received a call for a new grad's issue. So the new grad, she calls me and says, I need your help in this patient's room, and it was a COVID patient's room. So the thing with COVID patients is that they quickly decline, so they may seem like they're totally fine, and then just in the split of a moment, from requiring 3 liters of oxygen, they require high flow oxygenation. And so I go into the room, I realize, okay, we need to put this and this and this on this patient, let's go ahead and transfer down to the ICU. So needing to go to a staff meeting that was, of course, necessary because I need to advocate for my staff for the next shift. One of the fears that I had at that moment was that my red pager would go off. So I carry a red pager, and that pager alerts me if there is a code. And I knew in my mind, as I was walking to this meeting, I have 2 patients right now that is in potential critical condition, and if it goes off, I got to run back over there and help them. So that's one scenario. What topped it off for me, really, at the beginning of this pandemic, when pre-vaccination, was a mid-30s guy who was recently transferred to my unit from the ICU, so step down, ICU, back to me. And his oxygenation demands were okay. He was fine. But then his demands started to increase, and he struggles for air. You can see it when he tries to sit up or go to the chair, his alarms would go off. And the reason why it really hit me, and I tell my husband this sometimes, that I have these dreams about him going into cardiac arrest. Anyways, one of the things that really hit me was that this was a guy in his mid-30s with no medical history, struggling to breathe. And I said to myself, that could be my husband. So with my fears of needing to get vaccinated, I said, okay, this is it. I mean, like, I can see it right now. If we don't do this, then my husband will be just right there, and I'd be having to transfer him to the ICU. So that really hit me. So back to the picture, with all the nurses in the scrubs, while we seem to be coping with the stressors of what is going on the floor at the moment here, I would like to point out something that may have been missed by many. These individuals have struggled through 2020 and are struggling through many things, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, just as much as the rest of the world. But the unique difference is that while many have had the time and opportunity to pause life because of the stay-at-home mandates, healthcare workers have still needed to keep on going. And so, to be honest, as I was preparing for this presentation and as I was putting these pictures together, I realized that I haven't had the time to really reflect on what has happened in the past. And so what I wanted to really share and highlight for you all is that healthcare workers are experiencing the burnout. So the next slide here is just some news briefs about burnout. So burnout, ABC Philadelphia had a news brief that says, burnout among healthcare providers increasing due to COVID-19 pandemic. Yahoo News states, we're facing a mental health crisis in healthcare workers. CNN, as COVID-19 hospitalization spikes, some overwhelmed hospitals are rationing care. And so, in the beginning, while the message of healthcare workers were of heroes, well, that was well received, of course, by the healthcare community. However, healthcare workers are experiencing what's called compassion fatigue. So in the next slide here, I just list the different symptoms of compassion fatigue. So it's bottling up of emotions, chronic exhaustion, just feelings of isolation, feelings of guilt, substance abuse, nightmares, physical ailments, mental and physical exhaustion, and the list just goes on. So the next picture, I just saw this picture recently, and it may be hard to see, but it's just really of a guy who is in his hospital bed with IV fluids or medication being infused. He looks pretty stable to me, So he's chilling, getting better, hopefully. But what you don't see in the next slide is actually what is actually happening. You have the healthcare worker who is underneath trying to hold up that patient, and they're actually drowning. What you don't see is this. When I saw this picture 2 weeks ago on social media, it brought me to tears, just like now. And the most recent source of anxiety for me, and I've actually had the opportunity to be an intermediate manager, just because my manager had to go on a medical leave. But one of the things that caused me some anxiety was that every week I had a nurse or a tech put in their 2 weeks. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, more than 590,000 healthcare and social workers quit their jobs in July. This has significantly affected the morale on the unit and the staffing. So you have people that are orienting new staff to come on and join the team, but then the next week, that person leaves. One staff member today, she knows that I'm here presenting, one staff member today shared with me, and I asked her, what do you think I should share? What do you think I should mention to everybody? And she said, well, we're all not okay. I said, okay. I knew that, but just hearing her say that really spoke volumes to me. The next picture that I have is just something that I found on a Facebook group that I have joined, and it's like a support group for like healthcare workers and nurses. And it says here, nursing job description: to provide high-quality patient care while sacrificing your own dehydrated kidneys, overstretched bladder, varicose veins, and mental status. So I have a group of people, healthcare workers, seeking for hope in the midst of a pandemic that does not seem to have an end in sight because of the increased hospitalizations of the non-vaccinated. As healthcare workers strive to survive the struggles of the day-to-day, keeping patients alive, I ask of the faith community to please pray for your healthcare worker. What may be surprising to you is that the Pastoral Care department has been so instrumental and key in supporting the mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being of staff members during this season. So we have those departments, the pastoral departments, you think of them providing care to the patients, but they have been so good at providing support to the staff as well. We have established relationships with the pastoral team, and with their mere presence, not even saying anything, just being there, provided comfort. Knowing that someone was there to pray for us. And of course, it's a healthcare organization that isn't overtly religious or spiritual, but prayers were welcomed. And it just continues to be a source of reassurance for us. So what I really wanted to show you or mention or highlight is that behind the healthcare worker, with every effort, as we have learned to leave our problems at the door to care for the patient, there is a person who may be struggling through depression, someone who may have been a victim of domestic abuse, or one who is feeling the deep pains of recent events that have exposed racism, discrimination, and hate crimes. When patients and families are stressed, they project those things to the healthcare worker, and the healthcare worker just has to take that in with no means of an outlet. And I'm sure that many of you who are in ministry or leadership or counseling may know that this may be true for us as well. I know of the talks of even pastors wanting to quit because there's this somewhat pressure to be externally okay, right? As you lead your congregation, as you lead the people that are in your care. Similarly, the healthcare workers who are there to show that they're there to care for you have that pressure as well. So the last few slides that I wanted to share with you are pictures of what is behind this healthcare worker, meaning me. So I'm a registered nurse. I have been for 13 years. And the picture on the far right is of me in the bathroom taking a selfie because that was the only place in which I could somewhat cry if I needed to, because sometimes I feel like if I'm leading a team, if I were to do that out in front of them, it may cause some grief as well. So that was that, me with an N95 mask and a regular mask as well. I'm also a minority and a woman. So the two pictures there, the one in the middle is of myself you can't see me there, but my cousin and our children, and we brought them out to a Waukegan prayer rally after some news of a shooting of a young youth in the community, a police shooting. So that's of that. And then on the left, there is myself and some people from our congregation went down to Chicago, and there was a prayer walk led by the Asian American community, who was there to show solidarity with the Black community in Chicago. And so it was a march, it was a prayer walk from Chinatown all the way to a Black church in the South Side. So, the pandemic happened, and of course we had all of these other things that had arose, and so that was some of the stressors that I was carrying in addition to the healthcare stressors. I'm also a daughter of immigrants, which, of course, of recent news and, political things aside, just of people coming in, trying to flee from, their homeland, just understanding that there are those complexities as well. The next set of pictures I have, so the far right is a hard one to take. I have my 2 kids. That's at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm getting ready to go to work. It's my second 12-hour shift in a row, and they didn't want me to leave. So that's me in the bathroom brushing my teeth with my 2 children. We also have Natalie. She's my daughter there with her pencil, and we're at a bookstore. And because of the start of the pandemic, schools had shut down. My husband and I, we decided to homeschool our daughter. And so I was also a homeschool nurse for a little bit. The middle picture with that little baby with a pacifier, that's me in our office at home reading research articles because I'm a doctoral student. I'm 4 years in. It's a 5-year doctoral program. So it's a doctor of nursing practice. And so Camden woke up. And so here I am trying to do that as well. And then on the bottom there, it says New Abbey PopUp Clinic. This is when vaccinations were highly coveted by people in the community, or some, maybe not all, but it was hard to get appointments. So New Abbey, I had a contact with a physician in the community, and we had a pop-up clinic for vaccinations for people in our community. We had 2 events. So trying to do that on top of everything that I had on my plate. And then the last set of pictures that I have is of myself and my husband. Of course, we are church planters in Waukegan, and trying to conduct services on Zoom, it's just it's a different beast to try to tackle. You're trying to encourage people electronically, and where really the church is about the people and the gathering, and that was just so hard. And then we have my whole family, as my husband was ordained into the ECC. So I'm not going to lie. I had moments of despair as our family and our church experienced times of crisis in this past year and a half. And it seems like, I'm just kind of bringing on this hopelessness, but as a Christian healthcare worker, I have been reminded of Psalm 18:2. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. Before I left work today, I asked one of my charge nurses, and I said, "How should I end this thing? I kind of can't. I don't know how to end this." And she said, "Well, you know what? I saw something on Facebook. Maybe you can share this." And I was when she shared it with me, I was like, "Wow, yeah, that's huge. Let me go ahead and do that." So it's a quote, and we don't know who posts these things because usually when these posts come about, it's not, no one's name is attached to it. If you love a healthcare worker, pray daily that God will renew their passion, joy, and contentment in their calling, because while the world fights over a shot, the medical field is fighting to keep their desire to serve. So if you could be an instrument of God to encourage someone, maybe you can encourage them to have hope in Jesus Christ. Because I know that ultimately that's where our hope could be in. And I'm thinking of, as I was telling my husband, I'm more comfortable leading in song because that's what I do. I lead in song. Speaking is not my forte, but I think of the Solid Rock song, right? My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but only lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. Thank you.